Hi, I'm Helen Taylor, author of Tie-Dye. I will be reading you a chapter today. If you'd like to know more about me and my books, check out the description or my website at helentaylorauthor.co.uk. Let's get started. Chapter 1. The killer studied Matthew Goodwin from further along the deck of the boat. Goodwin had the air of someone who was relaxed with himself and his surroundings. The slight elevation of his broad shoulders, the only sign of any tension. Goodwin scrutinised everyone, sometimes for too long, but that was to be expected of him. Let him watch them while you watch him. The killer hadn't believed Lady Luck when the man who had been instructed to follow Goodwin reported that he was taking a flight to Bangkok, then another to the island of Koh Pha Ngan. After what Goodwin had done, after what he had taken away from you, destroying your family, didn't he deserve to shoulder the pain? No, he deserved worse. He is responsible for everything that is wrong in your life. Until now, what the killer hadn't known was how or when he could make Goodwin pay. Then this. Perfect. It would be so much easier to get him here, with his guard down. The killer had spent both flights planning. Goodwin would suffer. He would suffer. The killer would make sure of that. Take it slow, plan meticulously, and revenge will be sweet. After all, this is your holiday too. It would be a holiday to remember. But let's not get too excited. Best laid plans and all that. Watch from afar. Maybe employ a local to get some close-up information. Watch, wait, plan and be ready. Everything has gone smoothly so far. He doesn't have a clue you're here. So wrapped up in his own superiority, his own life, that he hasn't recognised or even looked at you. He destroyed everything important to you, then just takes a holiday. A fucking holiday. He walks away from the destruction of your life and takes a holiday. Relax now. Don't let him get to you. He isn't worth it. Enjoy the sun for a few days. Something will reveal itself that might mean you could cause him greater pain than you've already imagined. The only worry at that moment, and it was minor considering recent luck, was why he was here. What could someone like him want in Thailand? He's not here for the party. He's 20 years older than most of the boat's occupants. It just wouldn't be his thing. Besides, the full moon party, with its illicit sex, illegal substances, and oft-times shootings, would not be the place that a detective inspector would frequent. Matthew Goodwin shuffled with the backpackers along the rickety pier. Excited voices filled the sapphire-coloured bay as battered and stained rucksacks were hauled from pier to boat across a flimsy plank with negligible effort or attention. Goodwin found space on the deck of the boat and dropped his bag against the wheelhouse. Sitting with his back against it, he stretched his long legs out so his feet hung over the side of the boat. As the boat pulled out and into the open gulf, Matthew took in the scene around him. Sun-drenched bodies were draped all over the deck. 2 young men took advantage of their section of deck to sleep, bare backs starting to redden as the sun did its work. Nearby, a group of lads sat on the deck railings, smoking cigarettes and swigging beer, chatting in a language he didn't recognise. A fair-skinned girl applied suntan lotion to herself as her friend plaited her hair. Couples sat between each other's legs. One girl traced her lover's dimple tattoo with the tip of her finger. Another played distractedly with the ring in her companion's nipple as he spoke to her, fondling her own lip ring with her tongue. It was obvious that this was not the first time these people had done trips like this. Where else had they been in the world, he wondered. What else had these people experienced to grow so much in confidence compared to the teenagers he dealt with back home? His thoughts drifted to Alison. He was almost at Koh Pha Ngan, the island where she was staying. Was this a good idea? How would she feel when she saw him? It had been 3 months. She didn't even know he was coming. Would she even want to see him? But he'd come. He'd had to. For the past year he'd been selfish and self-obsessed, neglecting and hurting the one important person left in his life. He was here to rebuild the broken relationship with his daughter, no matter what it cost. Would she give him the chance to prove he could be the father he used to be? 2 days ago, 6,000 miles away, after the welcome guilty verdict at the Old Bailey, Matthew Goodwin had made his decision. Helped by a blazing row with his best friend, Philip Bowman, he'd realised he needed to grieve for Susan, his dead wife. He also knew, to save his relationship with Alison, he must go to Thailand. Now he was on a boat, heading to the island that hosts the biggest monthly orgy of drugs and drink in the world. The boat was packed, with 5 days still to go until the next full moon party. 5 more days of people on overladen and poorly maintained boats, just like this one, carrying its lucrative cargo of revellers. It would be the party of a lifetime, one that would change lives. It would change his forever. Less than 10 miles away, a young man swayed in a hammock, his motions synchronized to the rhythm of the waves, the beat of the music melting into his mind. Dave Lewis took a long pull on the joint he'd just put together. He closed his eyes and let the drug flow with the music through his body. An ultra-slim woman emerged from the beach bungalow onto the balcony. She leant over his lanky frame and kissed his cheek. "Thanks for last night." Hazel took the joint from between Dave's yellowed fingers and pulled, less deeply than him, expelling quickly. Like pulling a spoon from treacle, his eyes opened. "You gonna get some breakfast?" Hazel shook her head. "I'm going to take a swim, then wander into town to do email." He frowned. "I'll eat later," she said. He snatched the joint back. "I can't keep doing this, you know." "Then don't," she spat, before turning and storming down the steps and off along the beach. Dave gave a weary sigh as he lay back in the hammock and took another pull. In his office in Surrey, Philip Bowman picked up the phone. He had a difficult call to make. He didn't know how he was going to break the news or ask for the favour. It was a big request to make of his friend, one that could wreck their friendship. Over the past 20 years they had been best men at each other's weddings, brought children into their lives, moved along in their careers, and built the strongest friendship Bowman had ever had. The last year, watching his best friend become the shell of the man he used to be before the accident, had been hell for him. If the roles had been reversed, he was sure he would have neglected himself and his family more than his friend had. He couldn't even imagine how he would cope without Jenny, and yet Matt had had to face life without Susan. Philip hoped Goodwin's decision to visit Alison was the right one. With everything Goodwin had been through, the last thing he needed was this phone call, but it couldn't be avoided. Kids, you love them with everything in your heart, but sometimes they break it anyway. He started to dial the number. The boat docked in Hadrin. Goodwin disembarked and strode along the concrete pier to the road. Lining the entrance of the pier were many Songtao Thai taxis. "Where you go?" asked an old Thai with a dark moustache covering his sun-withered face. "Chok Di Resort," replied Goodwin. "Chok Di," the old Thai repeated, nodding. He pointed to one of the Songtao, standing almost full. Okay, Dong Salat." He shouted in Thai to the man on the roof of the Songtao, placing luggage within the low bars surrounding it. Goodwin passed his bag up to the other man, but kept his day pack with his money, passport and flight tickets with him, and climbed into the back. Goodwin and the other 9 passengers all waited in silence for a few minutes until 3 more people joined them. One squeezed on the red vinyl seat opposite Goodwin. The other 2 stood on the board at the back of the vehicle, hanging onto the luggage rail above them. The killer stood to the side, away from the rest of the crowd, moving off the boat. Now was the time to wait, the time to watch. Can't risk getting the same taxi as him. Get too close and possibly recognised. That would put paid to all your planning. The killer listened as Goodwin arranged his taxi, hearing Chok Di Resort. "See? Waiting bay's off. Relax. You know where he is headed and where he will be staying." The killer took a seat at one of the tables outside a cafe near to the taxis. "Order a drink. Just relax. Watch, wait, plan and be ready." This was going to be so simple. Find somewhere close to Chok Di, see the lie of the land, watch what Goodwin does. Find out why he's in Thailand, where he goes and who he speaks to. From there, the whole thing will come together. Watch, wait, plan, and be ready. The taxi left Hadrin, the party town, moving down dirt tracks, bumping over the uneven surface until it came to a more forgiving one. Turning onto this, it picked up some speed. Goodwin realised that although the road had been built within the last few years, maintenance of it did not seem to be of great importance to the Thai population. Potholes were unavoidable, throwing the taxi and its passengers from side to side. The driver seemed to make no attempt to dodge them. Where greater sections of road were missing, the driver either swerved around them or slowed so the vehicle dropped into the holes and out again, causing his passengers to leave their seats and then fall back into them. In other places, the traffic slid on the clay that had been washed over the road by the rainfall flowing out of the jungle that blanketed the hills. The occupants of the taxi were well aware of the precarious nature of their journey, and when approaching traffic could be seen, grips tightened. Taut arms tried to keep bodies anchored, and everyone breathed in, as if trying to make the whole taxi slimmer, as the drivers inched the trucks past each other. Suddenly, a wheel dropped into a ditch. The driver swung the steering wheel away from the danger, missing the other taxi by nothing more than an inch, as traction pulled it back onto the road. Apologies abounded as the passengers knocked or fell into each other, but gradually conversation replaced the repetitive and unnecessary politeness. Goodwin sat in silence and listened. "Oh, sorry. Where are you headed?" a confident American girl asked the couple from across from her when she'd lost her balance and kicked one of them. She wore a colourful sarong and a bikini top. "Greenpeace Resort," replied an Australian voice. His girlfriend expanded. "We were recommended it by some guys we met in Laos." "Yeah, I'm heading to Charm Beach. Recommendation too. What about you?" she asked the two lads wearing Manchester United football shirts. "Wherever the party is," one replied, and they both laughed. The girl asked the Scandinavian-looking man the same question, eyeing his Thai girlfriend with hostility. He responded, "Staying with friends," then dropped his head. The taxi lurched. He slipped his hand between his girlfriend's shoulder and the side of the taxi, protecting her from bruising. The American didn't ask Goodwin. The man to Goodwin's left wiped the sweat from his face with the front of his t-shirt, leaving a damp imprint. Goodwin did the same with his sleeve. One of the Manu fans peeled each sticky leg from the vinyl seat in turn, pulling his shorts lower to shield his bare skin. The road continued to wind around sharp bends, rock walls to one side, sheer drops down to the cliff below on the other. Approaching the next hill, the taxi pulled over. The driver came round to the back of the truck. "Too big, not good. You walk. Too much heavy," he said to them, motioning with his hands for them to climb out of the truck. The young man between Goodwin and the open back climbed out. Goodwin laughed, lines grouping around his eyes. He shrugged and followed him. He turned to look up the hill. It went round a bend, still rising. "Maybe 100 metres, the driver shrugged. "I take again at the top." In the heat it was a difficult climb. Unsure of his footing on the polished road, Goodwin hoped the bend signalled the end of the climb. Clothes dripping in sweat, he rounded the corner alone and stopped. The bulk of the group came up behind him, followed by the Scandinavian man and the Thai girl. The hill just kept climbing, less steep, but nonetheless still upwards. The taxi chugged up, pulling into the side just in front of them. The driver hung out of his window, waving them to climb back in, shouting, "It's okay, now, I take you." Thank God, Goodwin sighed. Relieved and out of breath, they all climbed back into their parallel bench seats. How can sweat come from so many places? Goodwin tried not to touch anyone else, but they were packed so tightly it was unavoidable. "This was once the most dangerous road in Asia," said one of the lads. "Yeah, right. Who told you that? Trust me, the road from Thai border to Angkor Wat is worse. You just breathe red dust for 5 hours. Goodwin eyed the speaker. He looked like he'd done the trip recently, with his rumpled, dirty clothes and dreadlocks. That's not dangerous, it's just uncomfortable. It says it in here. The lad flashed a guidebook at him. That was before they built the road, said another with experienced authority. They waited for more. When I first came here in 88, there wasn't a road. I wouldn't fancy this trip without a road. I bet loads of trucks just slipped over the edge, crashing down against the rocks and into the sea. Goodwin and others looked out of the taxi and down toward the Gulf, imagining the wreckage. How long have you been travelling? The American was asking questions. About 4 years this time, but I did the circuit 10 years before too. The man shrugged. Cool. Has it changed much? The man's eyes widened and he shook his head. What do you think? Of course it has. I had to go to the mainland for cash then. Now there's 3 ATMs on the island. Wow. Goodwin hadn't even thought about cash points. This piece of information was welcome. He tuned out the chatter, thinking about Alison. Dave would be there too. Dave Lewis, his daughter's boyfriend. They must be serious about each other. They were travelling the world together for 18 months. What did she see in him? She was intelligent, so why pick him? Everyone said she had her mother's looks, though he'd never seen her that way. She did have her mother's frame, but with his height. She was beautiful. So why was she with Dave, with his long, dirty blonde, coloured hair? Goodwin had to admit Dave was handsome in some way. Alison clearly found him attractive. But it was the glassy look in his eyes that annoyed Goodwin. Stoned most of the time, he thought. Either way, he wasn't good enough for Alison. What made Alison pick these men? Much as Dave would not be his choice, he was an improvement on the previous one, Craig Hewitt. 11 months ago, Goodwin and his team had gone out to pick up Hewitt, who was known to have been involved with 2 victims of what had turned out to be a serial killer. What they hadn't expected was that the door would be answered by Alison. Back at the station, Hewitt had smiled at him, a shining white smile against his surface tan. The smile had stayed when Goodwin had asked whether he'd known the victim. Yes, I knew Cheryl. Who didn't? Laughter had spewed from Hewitt. What's that supposed to mean? Come on, detective, you aren't that naive. I admit I have a penchant for easy girls. Takes less effort to get what you want. His Australian drawl made the comment seem less sleazy than it was. When was the last time you saw Cheryl? Are you sure you don't want to know about the other girls? I'm, dating? Lifting his eyebrows, he waited, the unspoken question between them. When was the last time you saw Cheryl? 'Cause I've been seeing Lucy. A go at that one. Real easy. Easier than Cheryl. Goodwin had winced. Lucy isn't dead. Cheryl is. We are only interested in your relationship with the victim, Mr. Hewitt. Hewitt had stared straight into Goodwin's eyes. Are you sure? He'd put the emphasis on the you and shrugged. No, thought Goodwin, you bastard. I want to know what you have done to my daughter, so I have the excuse to beat the shit out of you. Yes. Now, I think you want to know how easy Alison is. Let me see. Is she a right slapper like Lucy? Or did she play harder to get, like Cheryl? Don't you want to know that, detective? A stormy sky of emotions had clouded Goodwin's mind. He felt sick. DCI Bowman, listening while watching through the two-way mirror, had stopped the interview and pulled Goodwin out of it. You can't do this, Matt. Yes, I can. Look at him. He's so fucking full of himself. You're not going to do it. It's too close for you. Are you saying I can't be professional? Yes. Yes, I am. Bollocks. He's just another piece of scum. Who happens to be screwing Alison. Goodwin had smashed his fist into the wall Hewitt was sitting behind, wanting the wall to be Hewitt. Rubbing his throbbing hand, he'd nodded at Bowman and left the room. He couldn't do that interview. He was too close to letting his emotions take him to a place he daren't go. He should have been able to protect his daughter from men like Hewitt, protect all women from men like him, but particularly Alison. Couldn't they see what he was like? He'd charmed them into his bed with little or no effort. She was his little girl. He should have known. But he hadn't known. Mind reading had never been one of his skills. Alison had been seeing Hewitt for several months, and he'd known nothing about the man. Why hadn't he known? Why hadn't Susan told him? She was Alison's mother, and she'd known, but she hadn't told him. Maybe because, already absorbed in the case, he'd never asked. He'd always had a good relationship with Alison, hadn't he? Well, not if that day was anything to go by. He wouldn't have even known about Hewitt being her boyfriend if they hadn't been together when he picked Hewitt up. Had he already been so little a part of her life then? At least Dave was a better choice than Hewitt, even if Goodwin didn't like him. At least he hoped he was. He wiped away the sweat at his receding hairline, grateful for his short cut, and looked around at his fellow passengers. They were all so much younger, years away from his lightly salted dark hair. The road levelled off with no more hills, the occasional bend, and fewer potholes. They continued along this main road, stopping to drop people off at resorts between the villages of Bangkai and Ban Thai. The only concession to Westerners was a 7-Eleven, but otherwise nothing. A mobile stall next to the 7-Eleven made noodles there on the road. The tempting smells mingled with oil and petrol from the motorbike garage next to it. Goodwin smiled. Back home this would seem unhygienic. Somehow it didn't seem so wrong here. They dropped off the two Manu fans. "See you at the full moon party," they called as they walked away. "Yeah, see you there," replied the American girl. The experienced one shook his head. "If you see them at a full moon party, I'd be amazed," he laughed. "Why?" "There'll be 12,000 plus people on one beach, drunk and out of it. You ain't never going to see anyone apart from those you go with." "Don't be stupid. Don't take anything you aren't prepared to lose." Goodwin had scrutinised the accommodation as the man gave the value of his experience. Away from the main area, old, weather-worn bamboo huts stood on stilts facing the Gulf. Newly built concrete bungalows, restaurants and chill-out areas were central to the resort. They drove on, dodging the mopeds. Goodwin took a second to look at one. A man driving, a lady behind, with two children sandwiched between them. How did they all fit? The distraction was welcome. He looked ahead. How many are there on the one in front? He tried to guess as they approached. 2? 3? Yes, 3. As they passed, he watched. He was right. No! The woman had a baby in her arms. 3.5 then. He looked ahead, searching for the next one. There were none. No more distractions. Would Alison be there so he could get the shock of his arrival out of the way? It was approaching 10:30 a.m, so would she still be sleeping? How would she feel about having her dad around, with all the youngsters about? Would he embarrass her? He knew she stopped telling people he was a policeman, as she had as a child. It was no longer something to be proud of, or to shout about, more a secret. It wasn't trendy to have a policeman as a father, let's face it. Was this the sort of place she'd want him around? With the drugs and full moon party? He doubted it. Hadrian was notorious worldwide as the host for the full moon party. Maybe it was a good sign she wasn't staying there. He'd be butting in on her world, wouldn't he? Was it her world? Or was she just in it because of that no-hoper boyfriend? She didn't do drugs, did she? Not like Dave. But he wouldn't have put Greg, Bowman's son, as being involved with drugs either, and he was. The taxi pulled up a sand path. A varnished tree stump with a sign, made from the same tree, stood at the road edge. Glinting golden brown, it said, Chok Di Resort. This was it. The driver clambered up the side of the taxi to the top. He handed Goodwin down his bag before appearing in front of him. How was he not sweating like Goodwin? Goodwin felt gritty, and his clothes clung to him. 50 baht, he said. You walk there. He pointed along the sand road. Goodwin paid. Thank you. Kop kum kap. Sounding like Kop kum kap. The driver thanked Goodwin, bowed his head. Goodwin retrieved his bag and started down the path. It was too late now. He was here. He had to go through with it, no matter what the outcome. He walked along the path, the coconut trees giving welcome shade from the intense sun, but not helping with the heat. Around a bend and back into bright sunshine, the path opened out to landscaped gardens with pink and fuchsia flowers and a small roundabout. He stopped. To his left were wooden bungalows built directly on the ground. To his right, some more of the weathered ones on stilts he'd already seen. Clattering pans and tempting smells came from the large, whitewashed building in front of him and sparked his taste buds. Motorbikes were lined up along a small paved parking area. 2 people crossed from the huts to his left before disappearing into the building further along. He took a deep breath and walked towards it. That's it for today, the end of the chapter. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you again next time for the next chapter. Don't forget to visit www.helentaylorauthor.co.uk to ensure you don't miss the next episode.